I'm Captain Maisie Ellis. I'm 27 years old, and up until 2 months ago, my life was simple: follow orders and serve my country. My grandparents, Harold and Elizabeth, were more like parents to me than my own ever were. They were tough, old-school veterans who taught me that honor is the only thing a soldier truly owns. When they were killed in that tragic car accident, I was completely devastated. Then came the meeting with the lawyer, where I found out they had left me everything, the entire $36 million estate. My family, the same people I can't even remember the last time they called to check in on my grandparents, suddenly wanted it all. I refused. They say war reveals a soldier's true character. Let me tell you, a will does it even better for a family. Before I continue, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe some things just can't be bought with money. Growing up, my parents were physically present but emotionally absent. My father, Richard, is a corporate shark who always resented the military life he escaped. My mother, Diane, is a master of psychological warfare who treats social connections like rungs on a ladder to climb. That resentment was on full display at their funeral. The crisp Colorado air felt sharp in my lungs, each breath a cold reminder of the finality of it all. We stood in the Fort Carson National Cemetery, a silent, orderly city of the dead where white marble headstones stood in perfect formation, a final parade under the stoic watch of Pikes Peak. The sky was a piercing, cloudless blue, a beautiful day for a terrible occasion. The only sounds were the wind whispering through the ponderosa pines and the rhythmic snap of the American flag as the honor guard performed their duty. Two soldiers, their movements precise and steeped in tradition, lifted the flag from my grandparents' caskets. They stretched it taut, a sacred canopy of stars and stripes, before beginning the ritualistic fold. Each of the 13 folds was a sharp, deliberate motion, transforming the broad banner into a tight, dignified triangle. It was a ceremony I'd witnessed before, but never like this. Never for them. A 7-man firing party raised their rifles and fired 3 volleys in perfect unison. The 21 shots echoed off the mountains, a final, thunderous salute. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet respect of soldiers I'd never met, I felt a profound sense of peace. These men understood honor, they understood sacrifice, they understood the life my grandparents, both proud Army veterans, had lived. That peace shattered with a whisper. From the corner of my eye, I saw my younger brother, Jason, discreetly check the Rolex on his wrist and roll his eyes. He leaned toward our cousin, his voice a low, impatient hiss that cut through the solemn air like a razor. "I hope this patriotic charade ends soon," he muttered. "I have a meeting." Patriotic charade. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. The folded flag, now being presented to me by a solemn sergeant, suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my hands. I looked at my brother, at his expensive suit and bored expression, and I finally understood. To him, to all of them, this wasn't a tribute. It was an inconvenience. The lifetime of service my grandparents had given to this country, the values they had instilled in me, was just a tiresome play standing between them and the one thing they truly cared about: the money. Once the honor guard had marched away and the other mourners began to disperse, my father, Richard, made his way to the graveside. He held a crystal tumbler containing a generous pour of what looked like expensive bourbon. For a fleeting second, I thought he was going to make a toast, a final tribute. Instead, he tipped the glass and poured the amber liquid directly onto the freshly turned earth. It soaked into the soil, a dark stain of contempt. "Stubborn old man," he mumbled, more to himself than to anyone else. Always lecturing me about moderation, yet he was sitting on a fortune. He turned his cold, calculating eyes on me. "He filled your head with that same meaningless nonsense about honor and duty, didn't he? Look where it got him, 6 feet under. And where has it gotten you? Playing soldier for a paltry paycheck. The real world doesn't work that way, Maisie." His words weren't born of grief. They were dripping with a lifetime of resentment. He didn't see a daughter mourning the 2 people who had truly raised her. He saw an obstacle, a follower of a creed he had long since abandoned for profit margins and power lunches. Before I could even process his insult, my mother, Diane, glided to my side. She didn't offer a comforting touch or a soft word. Her focus was on adjusting the diamond tennis necklace sparkling at her throat, a gesture as cold and hard as the gems themselves. "Maisie, darling," she began, her voice smooth as silk but laced with steel. "Don't be so selfish. Your father is shouldering the future of this entire family. He's under an immense amount of pressure." Her eyes flickered toward the grave, then back to me, devoid of any genuine emotion. "Your job right now is to listen and to cooperate. Don't make things more difficult with your feelings." Selfish. The word was a weapon, expertly deployed to gaslight and manipulate. In their world, my grief was an inconvenience, and my integrity was a character flaw. They were trying to frame their blatant greed as a noble burden, and my adherence to my grandparents' values as a childish selfishness that was hurting the family. I said nothing. There were no words that could bridge the canyon between our worlds. I simply stood straighter, my posture falling back on years of military training. My fingers tightened around the folded flag, the sharp corners of the stars pressing into my palm. I could feel the wool, still warm from the soldiers' hands. In that moment, I felt my grandparents' presence more strongly than that of the living, breathing family standing beside me. They were there in the rigid set of my jaw, in the unwavering stillness of my stance. And in my mind, a quote from Marcus Aurelius that my grandfather loved to repeat echoed with perfect clarity. "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't cry or curse them out here on this hallowed ground. I would not become like them. I would not let their venom poison me. I would win this war by being exactly what they despised: a soldier, honorable, disciplined, resolute. My mission was no longer just to mourn them, it was to defend them, to protect not just the estate they had left behind, but the very soul of their legacy. And that mission began now. My mission from the funeral carried me through the next week. The grief was still a heavy weight in my gut, but my training had taught me how to function under pressure, how to compartmentalize emotion and focus on the objective. The first battle wasn't going to be fought on some foreign field, but across the polished mahogany table in Mr. Goldstein's conference room. The air in the room was thick with tension, a suffocating blend of expensive cologne and simmering hostility. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table like a king holding court. My mother, Diane, sat beside him, her posture perfect, her expression a mask of detached concern. My brother, Jason, lounged in his leather chair, scrolling through his phone as if this were all a minor annoyance. They were a united front, a predator pack waiting for the moment to strike. I was the prey, alone on my side of the table, with only our family's longtime lawyer, Mr. Goldstein, as a neutral party. Mr. Goldstein, a kind man with weary eyes who had known me since I was a child, cleared his throat. "As you know, we are here to view the last will and testament of Harold and Elizabeth Ellis. They chose to record a video statement to accompany the legal documents." He dimmed the lights and a large screen flickered to life. And there they were. My grandparents. Seeing them move and speak again sent a fresh wave of grief through me. They sat in their favorite armchairs in the sunroom of the farmhouse, looking directly into the camera. My grandfather, Harold, spoke first, his voice as steady and strong as I remembered. "If you're all watching this," he began, his gaze unwavering, "it means Elizabeth and I are gone. And it probably means that greed has already started to rear its ugly head." A muscle twitched in my father's jaw. My grandmother, Elizabeth, leaned forward slightly, her eyes seeming to find mine through the screen. "We are leaving our legacy, the farm, the company, everything, to Maisie. This isn't because she is our favorite grandchild," she said. And I saw Jason smirk out of the corner of my eye. "It is because she is the only soldier in this family. And this legacy needs a soldier to protect it, especially from those who carry the Ellis name." The final words landed with the force of a perfectly aimed artillery strike, direct, unflinching, devastating. It wasn't just a will, it was a final mission order, a validation of everything they had taught me, and a stark condemnation of everything my family had become. The screen went black, and the silence in the room was deafening. Then, chaos erupted. "Absurd!" Richard roared, slamming his open palm down on the mahogany table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. The old man was senile. He didn't know what he was doing. He grabbed a thick manila folder from his briefcase and hurled it across the table. It skidded to a stop right in front of me. "This," he spat, "is a medical report from our family doctor, attesting to my father's diminished mental capacity for the last 6 months of his life. And this," he threw a second, smaller stack of papers on top of it, "is a legal petition to have the will invalidated. Sign this waiver, giving up all claims to the estate, or we will drag our grandparents' name through the mud in court. We will air every piece of dirty laundry, every family secret you can imagine." The threat was vile, a new low even for him. He was holding my grandparents' honor hostage, using their memory as a bargaining chip for his greed. Jason leaned back in his chair, a smug, contemptuous smile spreading across his face. "What are you going to do, Maisie? You're a pawn on a chessboard you don't even understand," he sneered. "We have the lawyers, we have the doctors, we even have Uncle Steve on the company's board of directors. What do you have? A uniform and some cheap medals." He gestured dismissively. "Take the allowance Dad is offering you and go back to your base. It's where you belong." His words were designed to cripple me, to make me feel small and powerless, an outsider in my own family. I looked from my father's furious face to my mother's icy composure, to my brother's arrogant smirk. They weren't just trying to take my inheritance. They were trying to erase me. I was a threat to their narrative, a living reminder of a code of honor they had abandoned. The pressure in the room was immense, a physical weight pressing down on me. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the doubt they wanted me to feel. Then, I remembered a lesson from my grandfather. He'd made me read Sun Tzu's The Art of War when I was 16. "Know your enemy and know yourself, and you will not be imperiled in 100 battles." I knew them. I knew their greed, their arrogance, their ruthlessness. And I knew myself. I was a soldier. I looked across the table at Mr. Goldstein. He met my gaze and gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the confirmation I needed. Slowly, I stood up. I didn't even glance at the folder my father had thrown at me. I pushed it back toward the center of the table. My voice, when I spoke, was calm and clear, as if I were issuing a command to my platoon. "Mr. Goldstein," I said, my eyes locked on the lawyer, "begin the countersuit proceedings immediately. The charges are conspiracy to commit fraud and defamation of the deceased." Then I turned my gaze on my family, addressing each of them in turn. "You have declared war," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady tone. "So, you'd better be ready for a fight." I reached out, picked up the single sheet of paper on top, the waiver, and, with slow, deliberate movements, tore it in half. I let the 2 pieces flutter down onto the polished table. The first battle was over, and I had just fired back. My declaration of war had been answered far faster than I could have imagined. I left the lawyer's office with a cold fire burning in my chest, a sense of righteous purpose. I drove back to my small apartment in Colorado Springs, the one place that had been my sanctuary, my quiet corner of the world away from the demands of the army and the drama of my family. As I pulled into my designated parking spot, that fire turned to ice. My father was standing there, waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs, blocking the path to my front door. He wasn't alone. Flanking him were 2 large, imposing men I'd never seen before, their arms crossed over their chests. They looked less like companions and more like hired muscle. "I'm giving you one last chance, Maisie," Richard said, his voice flat and hard, devoid of any fatherly warmth. "Drop the countersuit and sign the waiver. Or you walk away from here with nothing." He gestured vaguely at the apartment building. "This apartment is in my name. You will leave." The words hung in the air between us. A lie. A cruel, calculated lie designed to strip me of any remaining leverage. I knew for a fact this apartment wasn't in his name. My grandparents had set up a trust to purchase it for me as a graduation gift from West Point. I remember the day they gave me the keys, the pride in their eyes. "Every soldier needs a home base, kiddo," my grandfather had said. My father was not just trying to take my home, he was trying to desecrate a memory. "No," I said. The word was quiet but absolute. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply gave a curt nod to one of the men beside him. The man stepped forward, pulling a power drill from a tool bag. He jammed the drill bit into the lock of my front door. And then came the sound. A high-pitched metallic scream filled the air as the drill bit tore into the lock. It was the most brutal sound I had ever heard. It wasn't just the sound of a lock being destroyed. It was the sound of a final, irrevocable severing. The sound of my family tearing itself apart. As if the scene wasn't humiliating enough, my brother Jason emerged from the shadows of the walkway. He was leaning against a pillar, his smartphone held up, recording the entire thing. A slow, malicious grin spread across his face. "Smile for the camera, Captain," he called out, his voice dripping with venomous glee. "Let's see what a U.S. Army captain looks like getting thrown out on the street. This should go viral." My father's men finished their work and kicked the door open. They didn't give me time to pack. They didn't give me the dignity of gathering my own belongings. They stormed into my sanctuary and began to defile it. They pulled out large black heavy-duty trash bags and started throwing my life into them with brutal indifference. My books, my clothes, my kitchenware, everything was scooped off shelves and out of drawers and dumped like garbage. The worst part was when one of them grabbed the small collection of framed photos from my nightstand. Pictures of me with my platoon. Pictures of me at my West Point graduation. And the one I cherished most. A photo of me as a teenager, standing between my smiling grandparents at the Ellis Ranch. The man tossed it into a bag, but it snagged on the edge and fell, crashing onto the concrete sidewalk. The glass shattered, a spider web of cracks spreading across my grandfather's smiling face. That's when my mother arrived. Diane pulled up in her pristine Mercedes, stepping out not to intervene, but to supervise. She watched the men haul the black bags out of my apartment, her face a mask of cool disapproval. She looked at the pathetic pile of my life heaped on the sidewalk, then looked at me. "None of this had to happen," she said, her voice laced with a tone of disappointment, as if this were all my fault. "If you had just been reasonable." I stood there, frozen on the pavement, unable to move, unable to speak. I watched as they piled the bags into the back of my Ford F-150 pickup truck. They threw the last bag in, slammed the tailgate shut, and then my father handed me my keys. He didn't look me in the eye. That, perhaps, was the only mercy he showed me all day. Then they got in their cars and drove away, leaving me alone in the wreckage. That night, I found myself in the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart. The relentless hum of the store's fluorescent lights cast a sickly yellow glow over my truck. My entire life was contained in 6 black trash bags in the truck bed behind me. I was a decorated army officer, a leader of soldiers, and I was homeless. The cold of the Colorado night seeped through the windows of the cab, chilling me to the bone. Despair was a heavy blanket, threatening to suffocate me. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, the plastic cool against my forehead, and for the first time since my grandparents had died, I felt truly, utterly alone. But then, in the depths of that darkness, a memory surfaced. It was from SEER school, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, the toughest training I had ever endured. I remembered a grizzled instructor, a man who had seen real combat, real captivity, telling us, when the enemy takes everything from you, your gear, your dignity, your hope, they leave you with your most powerful weapon, your will. My will. I lifted my head and stared at my own reflection in the dark windshield. My eyes were hollow, but a tiny spark ignited within them. They had pushed me out. They had humiliated me. They thought they had broken me. They were wrong. A soldier adapts to the battlefield. And this parking lot, this cold truck, this was just a new battlefield. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. "All right," I whispered to the empty cab. my breath fogging the glass. "You took my home." I put the key in the ignition and turned it, the engine rumbling to life. "Now I'm coming to take back everything else." I drove through the cold, pre-dawn darkness, my F-150 eating up the miles on the empty highway. The adrenaline from the previous evening had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a hollow ache in my chest. There was only one place left to go, one last sanctuary in a world that had suddenly turned hostile. The Ellis Ranch. As the sun began to cast a pale pink glow over the Rocky Mountains, I turned off the main road and onto the familiar gravel driveway. The crunch of the tires was a sound I'd known my entire life, a sound that meant I was almost home. But a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. What would I find here? Had my father already sent his people? Was I driving into another ambush? My fears dissolved the moment I saw the gate. Standing there, silhouetted against the rising sun, was Carlos. Carlos Mendoza had been my grandfather's right-hand man for over 30 years. The ranch foreman who knew every acre of this land as well as he knew the back of his own weathered hands. A retired Army Master Sergeant, he was a man of few words but unwavering loyalty. His face was a roadmap of tough years and long days, but his eyes were sharp and steady. He watched my truck approach, his expression unreadable. I pulled to a stop, my window already rolled down, ready to explain the humiliating pile of trash bags in the truck bed. But he didn't ask a single question. He simply unlatched the heavy wooden gate and swung it open. As I drove through, he looked me straight in the eye and gave a slight, respectful nod. "Welcome home, Captain," he said. The two words, spoken with such simple, profound dignity, nearly broke me. Home. He called it home. And he called me Captain. He saw me not as a defeated outcast, but as the officer I was, the leader my grandparents had trusted. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a flicker of warmth return to my frozen soul. Inside the sprawling log farmhouse, the warmth became real. The air was filled with the rich, comforting scent of brewing coffee and pine wood from the fireplace. Dorothy was standing by the kitchen counter, her kind face etched with worry. She had been my grandparents' caregiver in their final years, but she had become so much more. A friend, a confidant, a part of the family in a way blood relatives never were. The moment she saw me, her face crumpled with a mixture of anger and relief. She rushed forward and wrapped me in a tight, fierce hug. It wasn't a delicate, polite embrace. It was the hug of a mother bear protecting her cub. "We heard what happened," she said, her voice trembling with indignation as she pulled back. "Mr. Goldstein called, those vultures, to do that to you, to Harold and Elizabeth's girl." She shook her head, her eyes flashing. "But you're safe now. This was their fortress, and now it's yours. No one can touch you here." She led me to the kitchen table, a massive solid oak piece that had been the heart of this house for generations, and poured me a steaming mug of black coffee. As the warmth of the ceramic seeped into my cold hands, the dam of emotion I'd been holding back finally began to crack. I wasn't alone anymore. This wasn't a pity party, it was a council of war. Carlos came in and sat down, placing a dusty ledger on the table. Dorothy set the coffee pot between us. The three of us, a soldier, a sergeant, and a caregiver, formed a circle around that oak table. We were the true heirs to my grandparents' legacy, a legacy of loyalty. "This isn't new, Captain," Carlos said, flipping open the ledger. "Your father has been testing the fences for months, trying to get me to authorize large equipment purchases from his preferred vendors, trying to access company accounts. I have records of every attempt." Dorothy chimed in, her voice low and serious. "He and your mother would visit, not to see how Harold and Elizabeth were doing, but to pressure them. They'd talk about estate planning and simplifying assets. It always ended in a fight. Harold would just tell them to get out. They had no idea I could hear everything from the kitchen." As they spoke, a picture began to form. A clear, ugly portrait of calculated greed. My family hadn't just become monstrous after the will was read. They had been circling for a long time, waiting for the moment to strike. I felt a surge of cold fury, but also a growing sense of clarity. Then Carlos delivered the intelligence that changed the entire battlefield. "Your grandfather was no fool, Captain," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "After the last time Richard was here, shouting about how the old man was losing his mind, Harold had a new security system installed. Top of the line." Dorothy leaned forward, her eyes bright with the revelation. "It's not just cameras, dear. The entire living room and the office. They're wired for high-fidelity audio, voice activated." I stared at them, the pieces clicking into place with the satisfying precision of a rifle bolt locking into battery. This house wasn't just a home. It wasn't just a fortress. It was an evidence locker. My father, in his arrogance, had walked into a trap of his own making. He and my mother had laid out their entire conspiracy, spoken their vilest intentions in rooms that were listening to every single word. I took a sip of my coffee, the heat spreading through my chest. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. My mission had a clear objective now. I found my grandmother's old Bible on the mantelpiece, its pages worn with love. She had underlined a verse in Proverbs, one I'd heard her quote before. "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity." My brother wasn't Jason. My brothers and sisters in arms were sitting right here, at this table. And the war had just begun. The days that followed at the ranch were a strange mix of peace and preparation. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt safe. Surrounded by the steadfast loyalty of Carlos and Dorothy, I began to feel the ground solidify beneath my feet. We spent our days poring over the evidence my grandparents had unknowingly collected, building our case piece by piece. For a brief, hopeful moment, I believed that the truth would be enough. I thought the fight would stay within legal boundaries. I was wrong. My family had no intention of fighting fair. Their next attack came from a direction I never anticipated, aimed at the very heart of my identity. I was in the office with Carlos, cross-referencing company invoices, when my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed a number from Fort Carson. It was my battalion commander. My heart jumped into my throat. A call from my CO was never casual. "Captain Ellis," Lieutenant Colonel Miller said, his voice stripped of its usual warmth. It was formal, clipped. "I've just received a rather disturbing email. It contains allegations that you are using your active duty status to intimidate your family in a private inheritance dispute." I went completely numb. The invoices in my hand felt flimsy, meaningless. My father wasn't just suing me in civil court, he was attacking my career, my honor, my uniform. It was the lowest possible blow. He knew that for an officer, even the suggestion of unethical conduct could be a career killer. A formal investigation, a black mark on my record, it could derail everything I had worked for. He was willing to burn my entire future to the ground to get what he wanted. But that was only the beginning. My brother Jason, a creature of the digital age, launched the second wave of the assault. He unleashed a coordinated smear campaign online, targeting the one community I thought was untouchable: my fellow soldiers and their families. Anonymous posts began appearing in Facebook groups for military spouses in Colorado Springs and on veterans forums. The narrative was expertly crafted to twist me into a villain. Greedy young captain uses combat status to steal inheritance from grieving elderly parents. The posts were accompanied by carefully selected photos of my parents looking somber and distressed. Photos likely taken at my grandparents' funeral. Jason even had the gall to twist the uniform code of military justice against me, citing obscure articles and misinterpreting them to suggest my actions constituted conduct unbecoming an officer. He was poisoning the well, turning my own brothers and sisters in arms against me with a cocktail of lies and half-truths. My safe haven was being infiltrated. The third and most painful blow came in person. My Aunt Pam and Uncle Steve drove out to the ranch one afternoon. While my aunt launched into a tirade about how I was tearing the family apart, it was my uncle's words that truly wounded me. I'd always thought Uncle Steve, my father's younger brother, was different. Quieter, more reasonable. "Maisie," he said, avoiding my eyes, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "You're making things difficult for everyone. Your father is a very influential man in the business community here. This fight you're picking with him, It has ripple effects. It impacts all of us. He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. You need to think about the bigger picture. For the good of the family. The bigger picture. For the good of the family. His cowardice, dressed up as pragmatic advice, hurt more than my father's outright cruelty. He wasn't asking me to do what was right. He was asking me to surrender to a bully because it was easier for him. He was choosing convenience over character. The betrayal stung, a sharp, bitter reminder that I was utterly alone in this fight against my own blood. That night, the quiet ranch house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a besieged command post. I sat alone in my grandfather's office, the only light coming from the cold glow of my laptop screen. I scrolled through it all. The forwarded email from my CO, the vicious posts, the comments from strangers calling me a disgrace to the uniform. I saw a picture of myself in my dress blues, a picture I'd once been proud of, now plastered next to accusations of greed and dishonor. The initial shock had worn off. The deep, personal hurt had begun to cool, hardening into something else. Something cold, sharp, and dangerous. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. This was no longer about money. It was about my name, my honor, my entire life. They had weaponized my service against me. In my grandfather's desk, I found his old copy of Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. I wasn't interested in the money, but I remembered a chapter he'd marked about the power of a mastermind alliance. He knew you couldn't win a war alone. You needed a team you could trust. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer. Mr. Goldstein, I said, my voice steady, devoid of the emotion that had been churning inside me all day. It's Maisie Ellis. I've seen the posts, Captain, he said, his voice grim. I'm so sorry. Don't be, I replied, my eyes fixed on the screen. They've just given us what we needed. I took a deep breath. The defensive strategy is over. We're going on the offensive. I want you to start compiling everything, every audio file, every invoice, every video. We're not just going to win this case anymore. We're going to expose all of it. My phone call with Mr. Goldstein was the turning point. The cold fury from the smear campaign had burned away the last remnants of doubt and grief, leaving behind a hard, crystalline clarity. I hung up the phone, not as a victim, but as a commander. The defensive phase of this operation was over. The next morning, I transformed the heart of the farmhouse into the nerve center of our counteroffensive. The massive oak kitchen table became our war room. I pinned a large topographical map of the Ellis Ranch lands to one wall and a sprawling diagram of the company's business relationships to another. This was no longer just a house, it was a command post, and I was finally assembling my troops. My mastermind alliance, as my grandfather's book called it, was small but formidable. Mr. Goldstein drove out from Colorado Springs, his briefcase filled with legal strategy. He was our legal officer, in charge of the official front. Carlos, with his intimate knowledge of the ranch's operations and finances, became my intelligence officer. Dorothy, with her sharp memory and detailed timelines of my family's visits, was our historian, our keeper of the facts. Each of us was an expert in our own field, united by a fierce loyalty to my grandparents and a shared desire for justice. Our first order of business was to review the intel my grandfather had inadvertently gathered. We hooked a laptop up to the security system's hard drive. For hours, we sat in stunned silence, listening to the audio files and watching the video clips. The truth was far uglier than I had imagined. We heard my father, Richard, speaking to my mother in what he thought was the privacy of the office. We just need to get his doctor to declare him incompetent, his voice hissed from the speakers. Then we can liquidate the North Pasture before Maisie gets any ideas. That land is worth millions to developers. We watched a clip of my mother, Diane, speaking to my father after a visit where my grandmother had been particularly frail. Just be patient, Richard, she'd said, adjusting her pearls. It won't be long now. Then we can undo all this foolishness about preserving the land. They spoke of their own parents not with love or concern, but as obstacles, as assets to be managed and eventually liquidated. Each recording was another nail in their coffin, another round of ammunition for our arsenal. Listening to it felt like a violation, but it was a necessary one. This was the truth, in their own damning words. The surprise reinforcement came on the third day. My phone rang with an unknown number. When I answered, a woman with a strong, confident voice and a distinct Hispanic accent asked for me. "This is Rosa Jimenez," she said. "I was a friend of your grandparents. I own a large agricultural supply company. We did business for nearly 20 years. I remembered the name. Rosa was a legend in the local business community, a self-made woman who had built an empire from the ground up. "I'm calling because I've been hearing the rumors your father is spreading," she continued, her voice sharp with contempt. "That man is a snake. I need you to know that years ago, he tried to pressure your grandfather into breaking my supply contract and giving it to a friend of his, at a higher price and for inferior product. Harold refused. He told your father he'd rather burn the business to the ground than betray a friend. I have the emails from your father to prove it. I will stand with you, Captain Ellis, whatever you need." Her call was a gust of fresh air, a powerful validation that my fight was just. My father's corruption wasn't a secret, it was a reputation. Rosa's support, and her evidence, was more than just another piece of intel. It was a morale boost that strengthened our entire alliance. In my grandfather's old military journal, I later found a line he'd written during the war. "A soldier doesn't win with the rifle in his hand. He wins with the trusted comrades on his left and on his right." My unit was growing stronger. After a week of relentless work, our war room was covered in notes, timelines, and evidence markers. We had financial records showing my father's attempts to siphon funds. We had Dorothy's testimony. We had Rosa's emails. And most importantly, we had hours of damning audio and video recordings. We had an arsenal. Mr. Goldstein, who had been quietly reviewing the final compilation of evidence, leaned back in his chair and a slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. "Captain," he said, the formal title now filled with a newfound respect. "We don't need to go to court. This is overwhelming." He gestured to the wall of evidence. "We just need to choose the right time and the right place to present this. They wanted a public fight. We'll give them a battle they can never, ever win." His words hung in the air, filled with promise. The tide had turned. The power had shifted. I looked at the map on the wall, at the faces of my loyal allies around the table. My mind, trained for strategy, started working. They had chosen their weapons: lies, intimidation, and public humiliation. Now, it was my turn to choose the battlefield. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you have the right people on your side. If you've ever had a friend or even a stranger stand up for you when you needed it most, hit that like button. And in the comments, just type the word loyalty if you believe that's what truly makes a family. Where would a public battle cause the most damage to an enemy who lived and died by their reputation? The question wasn't just about winning, it was about achieving total victory. A place where the truth would not just be heard, but where it would detonate with maximum impact. An idea, cold and precise, began to form in my mind. The perfect battlefield wasn't a courtroom. It was a ballroom. The answer to my strategic question came to me while scrolling through the local news website, the annual Colorado Springs Entrepreneurs Association charity auction. It was the premier social event of the season, a glittering affair attended by every business leader, local politician, and media outlet in the city. It was also my parents' favorite stage, a place where they performed their roles as benevolent community pillars. Their greatest strength, their obsession with public image, was about to become their fatal weakness. The plan was set. It was time to lay the trap. The first step was the bait. I had Mr. Goldstein send a formal peace offering to my father's legal team. The proposal was a masterclass in psychological warfare, designed to appeal directly to my father's greed and arrogance. I proposed the formation of the Harold and Elizabeth Ellis Charitable Foundation. I would retain ownership of the ranch itself, but the majority of the profits from the multi-million-dollar agricultural supply company would be funneled into this new foundation. The board of directors would be shared between us. To show my good faith, I suggested we announce this generous reconciliation publicly at the upcoming charity auction. And, as the eldest son, Richard would be given the honor of making the keynote speech. He took the bait without a moment's hesitation. From his perspective, it was a total victory. He would gain control of the company's cash flow, all while being lauded as a philanthropic hero who had graciously reconciled with his wayward daughter. His ego wouldn't let him see the trap hidden beneath the layers of flattery. While my parents were busy preening for their moment in the spotlight, Diane no doubt selecting the perfect designer gown, Richard crafting a speech full of false sentiment, my own unit worked with the quiet, focused efficiency of a special operations team. The farmhouse became a hive of activity. Carlos and Rosa distilled complex financial records into a series of clear, damning PowerPoint slides, highlighting every fraudulent action Richard had attempted. Dorothy, with surprising technical skill, edited hours of audio and video into a single, cohesive narrative, a devastating timeline of their conspiracy. Mr. Goldstein prepared the legal documents, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. Every piece of our operation was synchronized, every detail accounted for. We were preparing for a full-scale assault. The night of the auction, the ballroom at the Broadmoor Hotel was dazzling, a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns under the sparkle of crystal chandeliers. I arrived alone. I wasn't wearing my uniform. Instead, I chose a simple, elegant black dress. My goal was not to be seen, but to observe. I blended into the background, a shadow moving through the crowd, my senses on high alert. My family, on the other hand, was the center of the universe. They held court near the grand staircase, basking in the attention. My father was shaking hands, projecting an aura of power and magnanimity. My mother, draped in diamonds, offered dazzling smiles to everyone who approached. They saw me across the room, and I saw a flicker of pity in their eyes, the look one gives to a defeated opponent who has finally accepted their fate. Jason, ever the arrogant fool, sauntered over to me, a champagne flute in his hand. "Well, well," he sneered, looking me up and down. "See? You finally learned your place. Glad you came to your senses before you completely ruined your life." I just smiled, a small, calm smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I wouldn't miss this for the world, Jason." He took my calmness for surrender and walked away, satisfied. I let him go. A good soldier is always calmest just before the shooting starts. Finally, the moment arrived. The MC took the stage and, after a few brief remarks, introduced my father with a glowing tribute. "And now, to announce a truly wonderful new philanthropic endeavor, please welcome a man who exemplifies the spirit of family and community, Mr. Richard Ellis." My father walked onto the stage to a round of enthusiastic applause. He soaked it in, his chest puffed out with pride. He approached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and beamed at the audience, the picture of a proud son and benevolent patriarch. A massive projection screen behind him glowed, ready to display the newly designed logo for the foundation. Thank you," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends, nothing is more important than family. My father, Harold Ellis, was a great man. A man who built a legacy." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of his words settle over the silent, adoring crowd. He was in his element, the master of his own universe. "And today," he continued, his voice swelling with emotion, "we, his family, are honored to continue that legacy of giving back." He turned and gave a confident signal to the tech booth at the back of the room, a signal I had arranged with the technician an hour earlier. "Please, join me in welcoming the Harold and Elizabeth Ellis Charitable Foundation." He gestured to the screen behind him, expecting to see a beautiful logo. But a logo is not what appeared. Instead, the screen was filled with a grainy, black and white, completely silent still image. It was a freeze frame from the office security camera at the ranch. It showed my father, his face twisted in a mask of pure rage, screaming into the calm, resolute face of my grandfather. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The applause died instantly. A confused, anxious silence fell over the crowd. On stage, my father's triumphant smile froze, then collapsed into a mask of pure, horrified disbelief. He stared at the image, his own ugly truth exposed for the entire world to see. And for the first time in his life, Richard Ellis was utterly speechless. For a long second, the only sound in the grand ballroom was the hum of the air conditioning. Richard stood frozen on stage, a deer caught in the headlights of his own hypocrisy. The image on the screen behind him, his face contorted with rage as he screamed at my grandfather, was undeniable. Then, the first shot was fired. Sound erupted from the speakers, perfectly synchronized with the video. "You never saw me as a son. You only ever saw me as a failure." My father's recorded voice, filled with venomous resentment, echoed through the silent room. The man on the screen was not the benevolent philanthropist he had just pretended to be. He was a bitter, angry man, consumed by jealousy. From my position near the tech booth, I gave a subtle nod. The technician hit the next cue. The image on the screen instantly changed. Now, it displayed a screenshot of an email, its text enlarged for all to see. It was from Richard to his personal lawyer, dated 3 months before my grandparents' accident. The subject line read, "Competency issue." The body of the email was short and brutal. "Find a way to prove he's mentally unfit. We need to act before it's too late." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. People were leaning in, whispering to their neighbors. The air of celebration had evaporated, replaced by the electric tension of a public execution. Before the whispers could grow louder, Mr. Goldstein moved. He walked calmly onto the stage, took a spare microphone from the podium, and stood beside my stunned father. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Goldstein said, his voice firm and clear, cutting through the confusion. "My name is Samuel Goldstein, and I was Harold and Elizabeth Ellis's attorney. What you are seeing here is the first piece of evidence in a systematic campaign of fraud, defamation, and elder abuse perpetrated by Mr. Richard Ellis and his family." Richard seemed to snap out of his stupor. "This is slander. Lies," he stammered, but his voice was weak, drowned out by Mr. Goldstein's authority. "Is it a lie, Mr. Ellis?" Mr. Goldstein continued, not even looking at him. "That you attempted to have your own father declared mentally incompetent to seize his assets?" As he spoke, a new slide appeared on the screen. A signed affidavit from my grandfather's actual physician, stating that Harold Ellis was of sound mind and body up until the day he died. "Is it a lie that you attempted to siphon funds from the company accounts?" A slide with Carlos's financial report appeared, showing clear discrepancies and transfer requests signed by Richard. Down in the audience, Carlos stood up, a silent, powerful confirmation of the data on the screen. "Is it a lie that you attempted to sabotage long-term business relationships for personal gain?" The screenshot of the email Richard had sent to Rosa Jimenez flashed on the screen. From her table, Rosa also stood, her expression one of stern vindication. "And is it a lie that your son, Jason Ellis, launched a malicious online smear campaign against a decorated U.S. Army captain?" The screen now showed screenshots of Jason's anonymous posts, right next to a technical report tracing them back to his personal IP address. The final piece of evidence was the most damning. It was an audio file. My mother's voice, cool and calculating, filled the room. "Just let the girl think she has a say in things, Richard. Once the legal dust settles, we'll take back control of everything. She'll get tired of playing farmer eventually." That was the final blow. The collapse was immediate and absolute. In the audience, my mother, Diane, stood up abruptly, her face a pale mask of horror. She tried to make a discreet exit, but a pack of local news reporters, smelling blood in the water, quickly swarmed her, their phone cameras held high. My brother, Jason, had vanished. I saw him slinking out a side door, his face ashen. On stage, my father was broken. He stood there, speechless, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him in real time. The adoring applause had been replaced by a sea of shocked and disgusted faces. Business partners, friends, neighbors, everyone he had spent a lifetime impressing now looked at him with unveiled contempt. He finally saw me as I stepped out from the shadows near the side of the stage. He raised a trembling hand and pointed at me. "Her," he croaked, his voice cracking. "It was her. She trapped me." but no one was listening. His reign was over. The empire of reputation he had built on a foundation of lies had been demolished in less than 5 minutes. I walked onto the stage and took the microphone from Mr. Goldstein. I didn't look at my father. I didn't need to. I looked out at the audience, at the community he had fooled for so long. My grandparents' legacy isn't $36 million, I said, my voice ringing out, clear and strong. Their legacy is honor, integrity, and loyalty. The Elizabeth and Harold Ellis Charitable Foundation will be established. I paused, letting my words sink in. But it will be run by people who truly understand those values. I placed the microphone back on its stand. The sound of a single person clapping echoed in the silent room. Then another joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in a wave of thunderous applause. It wasn't the polite, obligatory applause my father had received. It was raw, genuine, and overwhelming. It wasn't applause for an heiress. It was for a soldier who had seen her mission through to the end. As I stood there, I remembered the verse my grandmother loved from the Gospel of John. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That night, I hadn't just set myself free. I had set their legacy free. Mission complete. The drive back to the ranch after the charity auction was quiet. The adrenaline of the battle had faded, leaving a strange silence in its wake. There was a sense of relief, of a mission finally accomplished. But it wasn't the triumphant celebration I might have expected. It was something heavier, more complex. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for my family. The next morning, the story was everywhere. The Colorado Springs Gazette ran a front-page headline: Ellis Empire Crumbles in Charity Gala Scandal. Business journals and local news blogs picked it up, each adding more details to the spectacular implosion. My father, Richard, was forced to resign from every board he sat on. Longtime business partners publicly severed ties. My brother, Jason, became a local pariah, a meme for arrogant failure. Their social and professional ruin was swift and total. I read the articles on my laptop sitting at the old oak kitchen table. Dorothy slid a fresh cup of coffee in front of me, her touch gentle on my shoulder. I expected to feel a surge of satisfaction, a sense of victory. Instead, all I felt was a profound, hollow emptiness. I had won the war, but the battlefield was littered with the wreckage of what was, by definition, my family. There is no clean victory in a civil war. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother. I let it ring for a moment, steeling myself, then answered. The voice on the other end was almost unrecognizable. Gone was the cool, manipulative strategist. In her place was a weeping, hysterical woman. Maisie, how could you? She sobbed. You've destroyed this family. Your father. He won't even come out of his room. How could you do this to us? We're your family. It was her final, desperate gambit, to cast me as the villain, the destroyer of worlds. The old me, the daughter who had spent a lifetime craving her approval, would have buckled under the weight of that guilt. But the woman who had survived the last few weeks was different. I took a slow, steadying breath. I didn't do this, Mom, I said, my voice calm but unyielding. I just turned on the lights. All of this. This is the result of your choices, of Dad's choices. I paused, and in that silence, I felt a final chord snap. Goodbye, Mom. I ended the call, and with a steady hand, I blocked her number. I blocked Jason's. I blocked my father's. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of self-preservation. Dealing with my father required a different approach. I couldn't bring myself to speak to him. A phone call would devolve into a shouting match, and a face-to-face meeting felt impossible. So I decided to write a letter. I sat in my grandfather's office with his pen in my hand, and the words came not from a place of rage, but from a place of deep, weary disappointment. Dad, I wrote, I think I've spent my whole life waiting for you to see me, to be proud of the person I became. I finally realized I was looking for something you were never capable of giving. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I sealed the envelope and asked Mr. Goldstein to have it delivered. As it left my hands, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. a burden I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for 27 years. The final step was to formalize the separation. I met with Mr. Goldstein again, and we drew up a clear protocol. From now on, there would be a wall. All communication from my parents or brother had to go through his office. No more surprise visits, no more manipulative phone calls, no more hateful emails. It was a legal line in the sand, a border crossing they were no longer authorized to pass. Dorothy had given me a book by a psychologist named Brené Brown. That evening, I sat reading it on the porch, and a sentence seemed to jump off the page. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. For years, the boundaries in my family had been a murky, toxic swamp. Now, for the first time, they were crystal clear. And in that clarity, there was kindness to myself. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I sat on the front porch of the farmhouse, wrapped in one of my grandmother's old quilts. The vast Colorado sky was a canopy of brilliant, glittering stars, more than you could ever see in the city. The air was cold and clean. The only sound was the distant call of a coyote. I had lost a family. The reality of that was a quiet, persistent ache. The family I was born into was gone, shattered by their own greed and my refusal to be their victim. But as I sat there, under the silent watch of the mountains, I realized what I had gained. I had found my voice. I had found my strength. I had found a new family, one forged in loyalty and respect, not just blood. I had lost the family I was given, but in doing so, I had finally, truly, found myself. And for the first time, that felt like enough. 6 months passed. The Colorado winter thawed, giving way to the vibrant, tenacious green of spring. The aftermath of the charity auction had faded from the headlines, but its effects were permanent. My old family had fractured, scattered by the consequences of their own actions. But in that void, something new, something stronger, had begun to grow. I didn't just inherit a business, I began the slow, demanding process of becoming its successor. With the sharp business acumen of Rosa and the steady, grounded wisdom of Carlos as my guides, we restructured everything. I didn't command from a leather chair in a high-rise office. My office was the sprawling acres of the ranch. My hands, once trained to handle a rifle, were now learning the controls of a John Deere tractor. The calluses on my palms a testament to a different kind of hard work. I learned the rhythm of the seasons, the smell of the earth after a rain, the language of the livestock. It was a life of substance, of dirt and diesel and honest labor. It was my grandparents' life. One of the first decisions I made was a difficult one. I submitted my papers and, after a decorated career, was honorably discharged from the U.S. Army. The uniform had been my identity for so long, but I came to understand what my grandparents had always known. Service could take many forms. My new mission was here, on this land. The first harvest of that mission came in the form of the Ellis Leadership Scholarship Foundation. Using the now healthy profits from the company, we established a fund to help the children of veterans pursue degrees in agriculture and business management. It was the perfect fusion of my grandparents' two worlds, the battlefield and the farm field. I stood before the first class of recipients on a sunny afternoon, right in the main yard of the ranch. There were a dozen of them, young men and women with bright, hopeful faces, their lives touched by the same code of service that had shaped mine. My grandparents believed something with all their hearts, I told them, my voice carrying on the warm breeze. They believed that true leadership isn't taught in a boardroom, it's forged in the field, whether that's a battlefield overseas or a hayfield right here. It's built on integrity, on showing up, and on doing the hard work that needs to be done. I looked at their faces, seeing the legacy not behind me, but in front of me. This foundation, this land, this company, it's not mine to keep, it's ours to grow. Welcome to the team. My life found a new rhythm, marked not by deployments and drills, but by planting seasons and community. While my old family was defined by what it lacked, empathy, loyalty, love, my new family was defined by what it shared. That new family was on full display one perfect Sunday afternoon in late summer. We were having a barbecue in the yard behind the farmhouse, the kind my grandmother used to love. The air smelled of hickory smoke from the grill and freshly cut grass. Mr. Goldstein was there with his wife, laughing as their kids chased a frisbee across the lawn. Carlos was manning the grill, arguing good-naturedly with Rosa about the right way to season a steak. Dorothy was sitting on the porch swing, surrounded by some of the scholarship students, telling them stories about my grandfather. The ranch hands and their families were there, their children's laughter mingling with the sizzle of the burgers. I stood back for a moment, just watching them all. This was my unit now, my alliance. A family built not on the obligation of blood, but on the free choice of respect, loyalty, and love. There was more warmth and genuine connection in that single, noisy afternoon than I had ever felt in a lifetime of holidays with my parents. While cleaning up later, I found a small yellowed note my grandmother had tucked inside her favorite cookbook. It was a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." The story ends, as it so often began, in the quiet hours before dawn. The old soldier's habit of waking before the sun never left me. I stepped out onto the front porch, a steaming mug of black coffee warming my hands. I watched as the first blush of pink touched the granite face of Pikes Peak, chasing the shadows from the valleys. For months, this view had been my battlefield, a territory to be defended, a landscape of conflict and pain. But this morning, it was different. The fight was over. The silence was no longer tense. It was peaceful. As the sun crested the horizon, flooding the world with clean, golden light, I didn't see a battlefield anymore. I saw a future. I took a deep breath of the cold, clean air, letting it fill my lungs. This dawn, this peace, this life, I had fought for it. It was a dawn of my own making. Mission accomplished. My story had its own battlefield. But I know many of you have fought your own quiet wars, in your own ways. The most important lesson I learned wasn't about inheritance or revenge. It was that you get to define your own legacy and choose the family that stands with you. If this story resonated with you, or maybe gave you a little bit of strength for your own journey, that means everything. Help more people find stories like this by hitting the like button and become a part of this amazing community by subscribing. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.